All right, everybody out there in YouTube land. Once again, it is I, your fearless host here at Role Player with 1,000 Faces, Matt Yancik, and welcome to another episode. So before we kind of begin, I just want to do my usual thank yous to everybody out there that has been subscribing and commenting. I am an itty-bitty, tiny, teeny-weeny potato in a sea of much bigger potatoes, and I do appreciate all the subscriptions. And I actually saw the other day there was a couple shares that somebody was giving out. I really appreciate that, and I definitely appreciate the comments that I get back. As most of you know, I'm a teacher by day, and it's pretty obvious I'm not doing this for the fame and the fortune. I mean, those are great. The glory is fantastic. But I'll tell you something, I'm doing it for the comments and for you, the viewer. So thank you very much for that. If you want to stay up to date on things that we're doing around the channel, we have some projects that are kind of coming up, some streams that are coming up. You are free to drop in on any of our social platforms. So we do have a Discord with there is a link to that in the description below, or maybe the doobly-doo, as Matt Colville would say. We have a Facebook page, which a lot of people may be migrating to after everyone leaves Twitter, or maybe they won't. I don't really know. Who knows what's going to happen with that? But please do stop by, say hello. We are a very small community, and though we are small, a lot of people look down on that, and they might say, oh my goodness, there's not a lot of people. But the benefit of that is that we get to talk to you more than maybe one of those bigger channels with like 16 billion subscriptions. But at any rate, you darn well did not come here to listen to me advertise my channel and then end the stream. You came here because you're looking for Little Red Dot. You came here looking for Little Red Dot. So I got to say that I found Chelsea Steverson maybe about 6 months or so ago, I think it was. As you know, I'm always skirting around the internet, like looking for creators and cool stuff. You know that I'm a bit into actual plays, and I do enjoy them. And the thing that impressed me most about her actual plays, besides the fact that she has 1 billion of them, is that they're so solid and so polished. And to me, as someone who really likes to try and put that like little extra effort forth, and is always kind of like looking for something to grab my attention, I'm always looking for like stuff that I think, in my opinion, is not just high quality, but is polished and kind of like holds together, not just on the surface, but underneath. And I think you'll agree with me. I've put links to all of her stuff in the description below, but I think after you kind of hear from her tonight, and after you watch a few of her actual plays, you'll agree with me. So without further ado, because my mother gets upset when I go on and on in these long soliloquies, let us get to Chelsea, or AKA Dot. So Chelsea, thank you so much for joining me on the big program tonight.
Thanks for having me. It's awesome to be here. And you know what? You're right. They're not here to listen to you talk about the channel. They're listening to hear me talk about the channel. So I'm going to tell all of you to go like the page, subscribe, and do the thing, because then you didn't do it. I did it. So you can't be held guilty. It's my fault.
No. Just trust me on this one. And we're going to talk about it here in a few minutes. But I got to say, and I was telling you this before the program, and so and everybody kind of knows this about me, I bring on people that I find interesting, that I think are creating interesting stuff, who are doing a really good job, or might have something like very like kind of worthwhile to hear. And your actual plays, even though we're already off the rails, and I didn't mean to get to actual plays until later.
It's my fault. You can blame me again.
The production level, and ladies and gentlemen, just look at her background right now. Okay, that's just a small sample. She's got like all of her ducks are in a row. Everything's like perfect. It looks like a cross between Michael Bay, someone shooting for Michael Bay, and David Fincher was over at her home, like setting up. All it needs
is a lens flare. Yeah.
Yes, that's all we really need. That's right. And Mary and whoever it is that shoots for J.J. Abrams also may have been in there.
Right. Yeah.
So tell us, what Chelsea, what did you really want to do when you grow up? What was it? How, like, so we all know where we've all ended up here on YouTube and Twitch and all of that, but where did you want to be, like, when you were 10 years old or 5 years old or whatever? What were you thinking?
Man, that's so interesting. I feel like most kids, I probably had multiple phases of my life where, like, at one point I wanted to do one thing, and then at another point I wanted to do another thing. My mother tells a story where I came to her and I came home from school. And she was like, how was your day? And I said, I've decided what I want to do with my life. Now I'm, like you said, 8, maybe 10.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, oh, really? What is that? And I said, I want to be the girl that serves pizza.
Oh.
And years down the road, I was, in fact, a girl who served pizza. So some would say that I've already fulfilled that destiny. But I had a lot of, I had
lived the dream.
I've lived in the dream already. No, but in full seriousness, I did not always want to be a creative. I didn't even know that was really an option. I grew up in a very, very small town. I come from, like, the smallest of Georgia podunks, like one red light, a few thousand people, countywide high school, football on Friday nights, the whole 9 yards. And when you're in a town like that, your perspective of the world is really small.
Okay.
And later on, we'll talk a little bit about maybe some of the things that broadened that perspective and, like, how I went from that to this. But I think the big thing is, like, I didn't know that a creative job was an option. It wasn't even that I didn't want it. So I ran down the list of all the things that, children did, and I was not really interested in any of them. And then my brother got a Sega. And Sega. My brother got a Sega, and then of course we had a PlayStation. And my I feel like I'm skipping questions, and I'm just going to talk through it because it all runs together.
Yeah.
And my aunt had a Nintendo, and this is that point I was trying to make earlier, which is there's this kind of important point in my young life, which shapes this question. I swears it, which is right before my 7th birthday, I was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is a type of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma cancer, and so my world was, like, shifted. I had to leave first grade early. I lost my hair from chemotherapy. I lost all my friends. I lived in a hospital for an extended period of time. But what that did was, because the nearest hospital that treated children was Jacksonville, Florida, I had to leave Podunk, Georgia to go be treated. And the hospital was the first time I had come across a non-school-based library, which tends to heavily curate in the South, that had things like comic books and sci-fi novels and things that, like, I didn't know even existed. And so my world like broadened. Well, during this time, and even trying to merge back into school, I spent a lot of time in and out of school. And my aunt had a NES, and so I played NES a lot when I was on a sick day sitting on her couch, or when I was recuperating from a bone marrow transplant and was watching, the original Dune on VHS, or reading The Hobbit for the first time. So it was kind of this tumble process of, like, jumping into the nerd culture. And so when I got ready to go out in the world as an adult, was, like, definitely ready to leave Podunk, Georgia, in which I never fit ever again after that point. I was going to make video games. I went to art. I originally was going to design car engines. I was going to fulfill my dad's want to become an engineer.
That's cool.
And I was going to go to Georgia Tech. I had a scholarship, and I was accepted, and I was going to design car engines. And then at the last minute, thanks to my very first Shakespeare production, I decided to go be an actor instead, or I decided to go to art school instead. And I was going to design video games. And then halfway through, I transitioned over to a theater degree, and then so forth and so on and so on. And so I was always just kind of the kid that was there. And I did theater in high school, and it obviously, like, changed my life because I didn't go to design car engines. That is not what Dot does now. She designs stories instead. But that's, like, the long and short. So I don't know. You go up and down. Like, one point I was like, oh, I'm going to take care of animals. I'm going to be a vet, or, oh, I want to do this random thing. But it wasn't really until I could look back across kind of a span and recognize these kind of important points of cultural influence from the nerd culture fandom spectrum, long before it was, like, talked about in popular culture, right? I read Hobbit from the original paperback my mom bought in, like, the 70s, right? Or they had the original box set of the original Star Wars. And even though I was young, my mom was like, well, think you'll like this. And it's not like you can go outside and play with the other kids because you're super fragile. So here, have a VHS, and that's how I was introduced to Star Wars. And so anyways, all of that to be said, long and short, I ended up in art school, and I got a theater degree, for my first undergrad. And yeah, that's how I got out into the world.
What's interesting to me about that is there's a couple things. So I guess the first thing which I was about to ask you about, but I think you kind of cleared it up. You mentioned how, and I apologize for bringing up any bad memories or whatever, but you say that you go to Florida because you need this certain medical care,
Right.
and help and all that, and that's your first exposure to like comics and things like that. Does that mean that beforehand, like when you were little, like at home, because you also mentioned that your mom had like original copies of Star Wars and maybe books, The Hobbit and all that. Why was it that you weren't exposed when you were home? What was it about the trip to Florida?
Well, I might have been partially like too young, right? And like my mother read a lot.
Yeah.
My brother read like a whole lot. And I remember the sci-fi novels that she had, because she read a lot of fantasy, but the sci-fi novels we had were Dune. We had the Dune series in paperback, which I'll talk about. Maybe if we get to it, I'll talk about my presentation. I presented Dune to my 8th grade class, and everybody thought I was nuts. That's a whole other story. But yeah, so I wasn't, my mom and dad, like I remember my mom loved, and they loved like Babylon 5 and these kinds of things. And so it was part of theirs. But when you grow up in the South, there is an expectation of how children are raised. And that is not exposing them to Star Wars at 6 or 7 years old, right? And even then, I'm getting, at that point, when you're that young, you're getting most of your cultural references from books in school, church, right? Which is a huge part of Southern culture, right? You're getting your stories and your fables in these kind of other ways. And so in school, they're not going to hand you an X-Men comic. You're also talking about exposure to like, oh, I knew there were like comics. It wasn't a blind side. It's just like there was nowhere to buy them. You couldn't get comics where I grew up, right? There was no comic book store. The only place I knew that had comics is the old gentleman who cut my dad's hair, Mr. Larry.
Yeah.
Mr. Larry had a couple comic books in his shop, but they were all for dudes, right? I remember picking up X-Men for the first time. I was like, yo, look at these cool ladies. Look at these cool ladies, right? So that was kind of like a whole other like, and then it expands from there. And then my mom's like, oh, well, if you like this, maybe you'll like this, right? Or maybe you'll like I remember watching. She was like, this might be a little too old for you. She put on Stargate, the Stargate movie, and I remember I was just like, oh. And then when I got a little bit older, she was like, okay, now you can see Dune because I think you'll actually appreciate it. And then I was like, oh, it's a book. I have to read the book, So it's like a whole thing. I remember my mom listened to when she found out that I liked The Hobbit, which I got my copy from in the hospital library. She went out and bought. This is when books on tape were huge. This is when everybody had a cassette player or a CD player, and everybody was transitioning books on tape to CD. And my mom went out and got the entire set of the Lord of the Rings. And the first time I read through the Lord of the Rings was a CD, a listen through CD that we listened to on the travel back and to from Jacksonville to the hospital and back, which was about an hour and 15 minutes both ways. So we would get a lot of really good listen time. And so I used to sleep in the car ride back and forth from the hospital after all the chemotherapy, listening to Lord of the Rings.
What?
So it's not, I wouldn't say that my parents kept it from me. It's just, it wasn't part of that small town culture. And then once we got out, it was like, oh, well, it's as hard as it is to say, it's safe for you to experience these things in this way,
It's interesting. The next thing I was going to kind of comment on is the fact that you mentioned how you've had so many different interests, and what immediately sort of what I plug into that is anytime I meet often when I meet a writer, a designer, and an actor, an artist, or whatever, they often tell me that they have so many diverse interests. And I think that one of the ways they sort of express or feed those interests is because of the fact that you can kind of pick something that you're interested in, focus on it for a relatively short amount of time, become relatively familiar with it, and then sort of encapsulate it and say something about it and then move on to something else. And if I look at I was telling Dot this before the broadcast. I was saying it was kind of tough to do research for you because of the fact that when I went back, there are so many different. Like I feel like there are some creators where I'm like, okay, I'm finished and I've looked at everything, and or at least I've discovered everything, and there's nothing out there left. But I feel like with you, up until like 10 minutes before we came into the Zoom call, I was still finding stuff. And
I was about to say, I did a stream not but like 3 hours ago, so there's new content just before this.
Let me, like, yeah, I feel like I'm on a treadmill trying to keep up with what you're creating. And now this is not, so everybody knows this. I send my questions beforehand, so I'm going to go a little bit off the rails. And this wasn't, I don't think it was in the list I sent you. What is it then that makes you so prolific about it? Because you are like just immensely, like you said, you're always doing something. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, she'll be hopping onto a stream right after mine. I'm kind of sandwiched in between whatever she did before and Arv Eleron, who you should also check out. He's really good.
Arv's
I don't
wonderful.
have a link to him, but maybe I'll throw that in the bottom there. But why do you think you're so prolific? Are you always busy all the time, or do you ever have
I am always busy all the time. I would be lying to you if I said I wasn't. I think part of it that we learn as an artist is like the hustle's never really done, right? Like we're taught that, especially if you want to be an artist in any capacity, actor, writer, painter, basket weaver. It doesn't matter. There's a hustle that goes to the creative process because of simply the way the world views creatives, the way we value them both monetarily and in other ways, and the things that we create. So you learn the hustle early on. And I think it's also important to remember that I've been doing this quite a while.
Yeah.
I think this will be 2023 marks 7 years. I've been producing, or I've been involved in tabletop in a streaming capacity, whether that started on Twitch or I never really streamed to Facebook, but Twitch is where I started. But I didn't start with tabletop. I started Twitch as a cosplayer. So I was making cosplay for Dragon Con, right? So yeah, even before I was doing tabletop, I was over here doing this other thing. And so I've been at this a hot minute. And I think that's another aspect to the concept of, if we think about the greatest artist in history, let's just take, I don't know, Da Vinci. No. Let's take Van Gogh. Let's take Van Gogh. Van Gogh was not famous in any way when he was alive.
I know, it sucks, doesn't it?
Right? He lived his whole life.
Yeah.
But no matter his fame, right, or no matter how much the one painting he sold or whatever it was, he never stopped.
Right.
Because the creative process is not about an end product. It's about a process, right?
Yeah.
The creative product is not product. It is process. And so if it's process, there is never really an end point. You're never going to probably see me stop telling stories or stop playing games. That may change in how that capacity looks. It may not be tabletop. Maybe I go back to video gaming on my Twitch channel, or maybe I start designing games or writing them, or, there's 1,000 different options, but you're never going to see me stop, because if that is what actually makes me happy as a creative, that it means my outlet is being fulfilled, which is actually funny. That's how I got to doing tabletop and not theater anymore, because I wasn't fulfilled. I was not fulfilled. And so when I moved and I found something fulfilling, it's like, well, how am I supposed to stop? I'm fulfilling my creative purpose. And when you find that, then in the hustle, it's still hustle, but it's fulfilling. And so it makes it every ounce of that time worth it. No matter if you're working 2 extra jobs, right? It's like, especially when you're passionate and you get into things, you're like, I don't mind waiting tables 40 hours a week and then rehearsing for 30,
Yes.
I don't mind that, because those tiny tips mean that I'm out here doing the thing. And, some of that changes over time, and the starry-eyed and the bright lights dissipate into reality. But the reality is the passion never really goes away if it's something that you're really passionate about creating.
Let me stop you there for a second, because that to me is interesting. So you mentioned that. So for those of you that don't know, and you can correct me exactly here if I'm wrong, you went to school for acting.
I did. So my undergraduate degree is in media and performing arts.
Okay.
So that includes the performance side of everything from film, TV, voiceover, commercials, the works of faced entertainment.
So from what I understand then, you kind of covered a very rich spectrum of performance art, right? And so you're doing a lot of different things. You mentioned there very quickly, you said it wasn't quite doing something for you. And I guess tabletop, at least for this current, time, is doing it for you. So I guess, can you tell me, what was the performance doing on stage, like, or for the theater, or for acting, or for whatever it happened to be? What was it doing for you then? What does tabletop have now that you were missing?
Yeah. I think just like any aspect of our lives, we, just like me leaving the small town and my perspective of the world getting larger. It's much like that as as any artist, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we are told by societal norms that this is what a painter looks like, or this is what an actor looks like, or this is what a storyteller looks like. And so we pigeonhole ourselves. So you go to art school to get a theater degree to make theater or film because that is what you know. But when you get there, and even when you get out of it, you realize that's not it. So, I was a working actor. I did a lot of regional Shakespeare for many, many years when I was in college. And even after some, when I got out, and then I moved to Atlanta, did the unpaid internship. I followed the system, the artistic system, right? And while I did it, I worked odds and end jobs. And then I found a job that helped pay me through grad school. And it didn't make a lot of money, but I made the bills and I got through to grad school. And it was working for a history center in their education department, doing first person interpretation for students on their Civil War farm, on they had like a 1920s mansion. So you see what like a house looked like with butlers and maids and stuff. And so we would develop these interactive stories for these kids in first person. And not in like your cheesy like Renaissance way, but like full on first person. Like I am in a dress, I am making hardtack. You want to help me make hardtack, right? Over a hot fire in the middle of Georgia heat, summer, like first person, as much as you can get to like reenactment in an educational format. And so I did this for years, and I was so fulfilled. I was so fulfilled during my time in grad school because I was teaching kids, and that's fun. And I've always been part of education in some way, shape, or form. But I was like, nobody told me that this was an option. Nobody told me that I didn't have to go to New York. I didn't have to go to LA. I could stay in Atlanta and work for this history center and pay my way through grad school in a really awesome way where I get to make characters. I get to do research. I get to go to a freaking archive and hold letters from the Civil War about this woman who lost her husband, and I get to play her, right? That's like a whole other level of acting I didn't know existed. And so I say that to answer your question because I think that's the idea, right?
Yeah.
My spectrum of what an actor or storyteller looked like started to kind of expand. And when you're in college, as any art college, for those of you that went, you'll know what I'm talking about. They teach you a lot of tools. That's what they do. They teach you all of these tools for creating your art, ways to become inspired, ways to actually do the thing. Right. And when you're an actor, they're teaching you voice stuff, and we're playing games, and we're collaborating, and we're making these stories, improv sometimes it's off the page, but we're playing. There's an aspect of play in everything that we did. And then when I got to the real world, I found that play kind of went away because the theater was interested in business.
Right.
The theater was like, you have 3 weeks to rehearse. You got 4 weeks of a run. Right? Here's our time. Here's our thing. Stand in your light. Wear this costume. I don't like the way you said that. Try a different. It wasn't about play. It was about the director's vision.
Yeah.
And I found that more and more and more, that it became about the vision of everything else. And the actor was really just a pawn. It was a pawn on this chessboard of how they wanted this piece of art to look. And I got really tired of asking for permission as this like red-haired ingenue. I was trying out for all the parts. I had an agent. I was going in, and then everybody there looked like me, right? Just the detrimental aspects alone that come with it, we can leave those to the side. But the core concept of like, I was just asking, I was begging to be able to participate.
Yeah.
And what I found about theater is it is the only art form that you have to ask to participate. Same thing with film. If a painter wants to use yellow paint, nobody tells them no. Or that's not the right color. They just do it. And so theater has this barrier to entry. It has a barrier to entry for your audience, and it has a barrier to entry for those in which participate, because it is still a system but there's somebody at the top. And in the end, the actor really isn't anywhere near the top. Because if I quit because I was treated poorly or my ideas weren't taken seriously as a female on the stage, they'll just find a replacement because I'm just the yellow paint.
It's actually,
I'm not actually the painter.
What's interesting is I think you've kind of articulated something that has sort of been on my mind and I've been trying to figure out how to say for actually quite a long time. So, you know, I went to film school because I wanted to like write and direct, and for a short amount of time I did the same. But I noticed all the things that you're saying were very true. The stakes were extremely high because the productions that people were working on were like so expensive and that could be opening on a stage on opening night, but that costs money, especially if you like plotted out a certain number of weeks the show's going to run, or months or years or whatever. And if you're doing that for film too, you're sinking tons of money into it. And I never thought so much about, like, I've often described role-playing and being a game master as being a director, but I know that's not right because there's got to be this other word for it. Director is exactly what you're saying. You work and you collaborate, but ultimately it often comes down to the director kind of telling.
There's vision. It's the director's vision,
yes.
Right? Or the board of directors of the theater, right? There's all these systems in place that don't really make you, the actor, feel like an artist.
Right.
You are, and I feel like an artist, but the system's not in place to let you be one, especially if you're just the yellow paint.
Yeah.
You're not the person putting it on the canvas. You're just being told to be yellow.
Right.
And so there's this system, and it didn't work for me. And it took me years of painstaking auditions and stupid callbacks and cattle calls and heels and headshot printing and money lost and all of this kind of stuff to realize, thanks to the world that is live streaming, that there was something else. Now, I was introduced to D&D in college in my program, thanks to actually my fight choreography teacher, who introduced me, and I fell in love. And then when I moved to Atlanta, I roped some friends into playing, and that's actually was my first GM. I was like, if nobody's gonna run for me, I'm gonna learn to do it.
Yeah,
that is also the dot way, right? Which is again the story of how like I got to grad school when all this was going on, and I realized I wasn't the person at the top because all they were talking, it was all business. I needed to understand that business. I was like, oh, I know how to bring the system down. I have to get to the top and kick that person down so that I can restructure that system. So I went to grad school for arts business. And I raced through it in like a year and a half and got my master's degree and came out the other side with a business knowledge of how to apply that to the arts. And that's real power. It was very powerful. And so I worked for nonprofit for a while, right? I was a vice principal at a private school for a while, and I did a lot of different things. I worked for an improv comedy house. Biggest one here in Atlanta. Was a marketing director for years. And so it put me in these positions to learn a lot of different things. Worked for radio stations. I've worked for museums. I've sat on board of directors before. And so it kind of gave me a whole other perspective of the world, but it was still that idea of like, this isn't working for me. I either have to break the system down or I have to find a way to make it work. And so I ended up on Twitch. I was doing cosplay streaming, and then a friend invited me over to a channel that's not around anymore called Encounter Roleplay. And they used to do Thursday afternoon. This was years ago. This was years ago before it was cool to stream. Nobody was streaming tabletop to Twitch. It was like a couple people. Like I think Hyper RPG at the time was streaming. Critical Role was out there doing YouTube still, right? Because they were still with Beacon Sundry at this time. And there was Encounter Roleplay, which this was this kind of ground up, much like we know tabletop streams to be today. It was the first kind of ground up. And every Thursday they would do a kind of West Marches style one shot where you could just drop in. You signed up, they put you in a slot, you showed up and played with people from all over the place. And I got invited because my best friend was GMing that week. And from my podunk hometown, one of my best friends from this podunk hometown called me up and he was like, hey, I saw you have a Twitch channel. I was watching your cosplay stream. Would you be interested in coming to play some D&D? And I was like, I didn't know
that was possible.
Thing.
Yeah.
And then that was when my whole my what I thought was a perspective of what storytelling looked like went
right.
and like exploded. And everything that I had loved from years, from acting and storytelling to production, right? In radio stations and on film sets to costuming and even a lot of the hosting stuff that I've done even before that, right? All kind of came crashing into this one place. And I was like, look at this. This is what I've been looking for. And so all of the things that I had gathered over the years that I thought was just fleeting stuff, right? This idea of like, oh, I do this for a while and I love it. And then I get passionate about another thing actually turned out to be a lot of different puzzle pieces that just didn't have its frame yet. And then when I found it, it was kind of a no-brainer.
Yeah.
And I became addicted and I started participating on other channels quite a lot. And then I taught myself how to do it and I started self-producing. And the years of grad school and experience and being out there in a creative industry where it is cutthroat, where money is hard to find, kind of fed directly into the building of what was my community, which we call the Dot Lot. Where I produced quite a lot of non-D&D based RPG games.
Yeah.
And it was one of the first channels that was doing non-D&D stuff as well. And so I would reach out to indie designers. I was like, what's about to hit that you think nobody is going to buy? And we would play it. And then I started getting more offers and companies would come and do this thing. And so I took my time and I rolled through the things I wanted to do. And I found that storytelling takes a lot of different forms. And to bring it full circle to actually answer your question.
No, you're totally answering my question.
I think one of the things that tabletop does that theater didn't do for me is actually allow me to be the artist and not the paint.
Right.
Because whether I'm a GM or I'm a player, the process is actually extraordinarily collaborative. This character is not anybody else's character. I don't get told what to wear, how to say it.
Yeah.
I get to develop, create, and build a story from ground up with people from all over the world in a way that I would never have been given that opportunity as an actor. And so I think that it's a more fulfilling platform for the kinds of stories I like to tell.
What is it safe to say that you're more of a game master or game mother sometimes than say a player, or do you kind of swing both ways, as they say? Like if you had to choose,
swing both ways, but if I had to choose, that's interesting. I think that really depends on what I'm GMing. As I've gotten out of the 30 hours a week of just like hustle, do as much as possible, the quantity over quality mentality, I've moved into quality now. And so when I choose to GM something, I make it. I put a lot of passion and time into it, which you have pointed out you see on the screen, right?
Yeah.
You see the details, you see the minute things, you see the care, because I found that quantity is great, but quality is better. And so I'd much rather take my time and go, and I learned this even on my own channel, months without content to be able to find the money to produce what I want to produce,
right,
or the story I want to tell, or the story that I want to tell with these specific people.
Can I ask you?
So, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
I was going to say, just while you mentioned it, and you don't have to answer this, but you say that you put money into it. Were you putting money into it from the very beginning, or was it like kind of the deeper you got in, you're like, my goodness, I'll put a few dollars here, and it kind of snowballed? Or you don't have.
That's a great question. No, this is an astute business question, and I believe completely in business transparency, which is something that lacks in our world today. That's my nonprofit mindset. So I'll be absolutely transparent. So when I left grad school, I had a really shit laptop, and it was time for me to upgrade to a computer. And I had I had a friend print me a 3D helmet, a Darth Vader helmet for a cosplay I wanted to do. What I didn't know is it was going to come in 60 pieces.
Okay.
And so he handed me this box of pieces. And I was like, what is this? And he's like, this is your helmet. I was like, where's the helmet? And he's like, you have to put it together. Here's the printout. So I learned to put a 3D helmet together live on Twitch. That is the first thing I ever streamed because it was 2 weeks to Dragon Con. And the only way I knew I would get it done is if I streamed it live to everybody.
The pressure's on.
So there were like 2 weeks of me doing nothing but sitting at this table in my workshop, like grinding and sandpapering away at this Darth Vader helmet. Like literally the only clip, I think, the very first clip you'll see on my channel is me wearing the Darth Vader helmet for the first time going pew, 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 pew. Like it's like sitting on my head. It's out there. That's the truth of the matter. And I say that because when I got to that point and I was like, oh, this would be cool. I bet I could stream it. I felt like I had all the pieces together to do it. And I had like a basic webcam, like a 720 webcam, right? I borrowed a USB plug-in microphone that at the time my boyfriend used to record guitar, his acoustic.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it wasn't even really a voice mic.
Right.
It was a guitar mic. It was like a music mic. Plugged it in. So we're talking like bare minimum setup. I used what I had at my disposal. And I knew I needed a new computer coming out of grad school, and I had saved a little money. And I went out and I got a Best Buy credit card, and I paid for half of it and put the other half on a Best Buy credit card, and I bought myself a rig, which I used for years.
Yeah.
Years before I like upgraded. Actually, I think the casing is still the original same casing. I've just upgraded everything on the inside of it.
Right.
It's still my iBuy. Like it's and that's also the kind of dot I am. Maybe one day somebody will give me like a super duper bang up computer. Till then, I'll piece it together. But I did start out, and it was an investment, right? Like I paid for half, but it was still like an $800 computer. I already had one monitor. This is the days before I needed two monitors to do things. Because it was just me sanding away at a helmet, right? And literally that's what it was. It was a camera on me. I started out so simply with it all. And then as I transitioned into tabletop, I spent a lot of time in other people's channels and watched how other people did it. And one of the things that I brought out of nonprofit, well, two things I brought out of nonprofit, which is pay your employees, because I was underpaid for decades of my life.
I noticed that. Yeah, you've mentioned that before. That's great.
Right. I've been underpaid for decades of my life in a system that was not built against me, but built against it. Right. The nonprofit system is built to keep the nonprofit system below the corporate America system. It's just built that way. But I also learned how to raise money. A lot of it. Right. When you're working for a nonprofit, that like you don't get your paycheck if you don't get that grant, if you don't get that grant from that, $50,000 grant from the government, like that's somebody's annual pay. You have to get it. And so the concept of how I asked for money and donations was like embedded in me from years of nonprofit work. And so when I started, I had a couple streams. I remember that I did two-part streams, testing Fate of Cthulhu. It's on my shelf back here, actually, before it was available. And those folks I did not pay. And then I decided after that run, I wanted to do something where I could fund the channel. And so I started hosting something called Sunday Fun Days, where once a month the Dot Lot would get together, and it would be a space for the Dot Lot to play together, to play with me, and we would stream it, and it was like low key, but we'd get to play new games, we get to hang out together. And Sunday Fun Days became huge because you could donate in certain ways and the kind of usual a la carte system. But at the time, that was new.
Yeah.
Right? It was a system that was relatively fresh. I was doing things like I would drink mimosas on Sunday Fun Day, and I used to keep it in a moonshine jug. And because I grew up in the Bumbles, I know how to chug a moonshine jug. So if if we reached a certain goal together,
right,
I would chug the moonshine, the all of this mimosa from this moonshine jug on camera. And so like I used to do these fun things. And obviously that's not where my channel is anymore. That's not even where I am anymore, because I produce so much elsewhere, and the spectrum of that has grown exponentially. But that's kind of how it started, right? It started fun. It started with me wanting to game with other people that wanted to game with me. And I started Sunday Fun Day, which inevitably became the donation system that put money in a pool so that I could pay cast members, pay an artist. And so I always swore to myself that I would not do a show until I could find the money to fund it. And that has kind of remained a staple in everything I've produced forward, because what I proved to myself and everybody else is that you can pay people. Now, some nights we might only get $50 in donations. That means everybody gets $10, but you're still getting something.
Right.
I'm still giving you something in return for your talents and your time and your beautiful story and you sharing with us. Which to me is, we can talk about it looking like a job and those kinds of things, and that's a whole other conversation. But the exchange of money is that option. And I started to get a lot of people on my channel that were like, I keep the money, right? $50 to me for the run of the show, or the $100 to me is not worth it. So to remain fair, I still wanted to give that money over, but I needed to find a different way to mitigate it. And so I started giving all my cast members two additional options. So you can take the money, your pay, or stipend or whatever. You could donate it back to the Dot Lot, where I would put it into like our charity for the month or for the year. Whoever we're working with would get the dollars. Basically, it would go to charity. Or you could put it back into the pool to split amongst the other cast members.
Right.
And many people chose that, which then gives the rest of the cast members who are hustling, being artists, freelance, the chance to earn a little bit more in an equitable way where the money's not lost in some bank account that makes it. And I was always very transparent about, like, this is what we're getting paid, right? We got $100 in donations tonight. That means everybody gets $25 tonight, right? I kept records for everybody publicly. Oh, I say publicly in our group document. Here's what we earned tonight. Here's what your payout is, right? Everybody got to see it. There was like a high level of transparency. And so because it was one of the first not huge channels, not D&D, not Hyper RPG, the Dot Lot was one of the very first places people were getting paid to do tabletop in a small scale stream setting. And so that model of paying people became staple across a lot of my friends' channels. In fact, the way I used to do donation bars where we fill it together. So instead of a la carte, like you pay $50, you get a nat 20. I got rid of that. And I said, what if we all just fill the bar together? And then we give creative control back to the GM. Right. So that they can still control it and nothing gets out of hand. But it incentivizes. It's still an incentive. It's gamification. And so that model gets adapted actually over to Unmade Gaming later on, who you will see I've done a lot of shows with. Yes. Right. I do an Alien show. I ran Coriolis for a period of time there. We just started a One Ring game. That bar method he adopted, and it funds his channel. It systematically changed people donating because that for some reason that concept of us working together to reach a goal for something to happen. And so now he funds all of his shows based on donation bars or gold bars.
What's interesting to me about this is the way that you've just sort of like just gone all around the traditional systems for funding, for producing, for doing. I really feel like I didn't know a lot of this about what you're saying. So what is interesting to me is that so many people are often thinking like, oh my goodness, like they're very excited by the idea of doing their own thing on their own channel. But I feel like there's this kind of, I'm not going to say it's a myth because there is some truth to it, but I mean, there's kind of this myth where like you can't really fund it. You can't break even, or you're sinking your money into it just for a hobby or whatever. But the idea that you are actually managing to pay people for their valuable time and not like undervaluing them, or at least, they have the option if they want to have it donated or given to someone else or whatever. I think that that's a really important thing. I mean, it's something that like my students will sometimes ask me like, oh, well, somebody wants me to write this story for them, or somebody wants me to draw this, or what should I ask? I'm not famous. I'm not like what, and I'm like, it doesn't matter how famous you are. It's how much time and quality and effort you put into.
You know what I used to tell the artists? So I worked for a nonprofit for a while that taught artists business skills. That's what we did. We were a nonprofit that served artists. So we would do health insurance. We would help you learn how to budget your finances, build a website, market, the conundrum of business meeting art. Basically, we taught it and we supported it through government funding to ensure artists could launch businesses. Oh no, what did you just say about your kid? Your kids at school, they would say, they don't know what to charge.
Right. So, or they don't know,
what their value is. So one of the things that I used to tell my artist is fame and is not equivalent to your value or what you produce. Fame is like a cape that we put on things to make it feel more special. If you get rid of that and you go to your state website, the Georgia state website, the employment section, they have public records of what the average pay is for almost every job in your state. And when you go look at artist numbers, sometimes the hourly rate for an artist is $45. Or the average rate for a writer is this, because the standard, the bell curve of the lowest paid writer that filed their taxes and the highest paid writer in Georgia that filed their taxes comes to the middle is kind of how it works, right? And then they give you a spectrum of kind of what the hourly rate is. Nowhere on that document or in those columns or that grid does it state your fame. Famous writers get paid this versus no. Stephen King and Dot, technically, I could ask the same as Stephen King. Now, I know that Stephen King's actually being paid based on his name. That's a really bad example, but you get the idea, right?
Yeah, I know.
Like a writer that writes a lot, that has a status and station attached to the amount of work that they've created, technically by government standard,
Mm.
could charge the same amount as you. Now, you have to ask yourself as the artist, well, this is my first job. What am I willing to take for it? If the average writer rate is $45 an hour or 10 cents a word, right? If we're looking at tabletop. And I know the best writers accept 10 cents a word. Do I start there?
Mm.
Yes. Yes, you do. I say, I want 10 cents a word. If they're like, well, we noticed your resume is a little light or you don't have this. Now you're in a negotiation.
Right.
And it's the best place you could be because it means they want you. And you can say, oh, well, I'll actually take 8 cents, right? And you can come down from that. But I think that there's this misconstrued concept of fame because of social media, especially in the younger generation. It's like, look, just go to your government website and look it up. You'll know exactly what a writer is supposed to be paid or you don't know. It is literally publicly there in a grid for you. You just got to go look for it.
So tell me this then, just to shift gears here. You
Sure.
obviously know what you're doing behind the scenes, and as I was saying, it shows up on the
Yeah.
channel. Is there a little red dot philosophy or methodology or for managing the table, the virtual table, how do you get the effects that you get, and by that I just mean like how do you manage to hook people? How do you structure your actual play? How do you decide what tonight's story is going to focus on or tonight's episode? How does that work? Do you have sort of an approach?
That has a lot to do with the game, right? Because I if you have watched any of my content, you'll note that I GM a one shot differently than say I GM like a 30 or 40 arc campaign through, space. And that's because we're wanting different things out of it. The story is different, right? You don't write a short story the same way you write a novella, or the same way you write a trilogy. Right? You just don't, because the space at which you have to tell the story, the page space is different. And it's not really any different when you're streaming online or you're running these tabletops. So I guess I have some things that I do. You know, I have the things that I've learned over the years, my rules, right? Like in a 2-hour show, you will never be able to do more than 2 encounters. I dare you. I dare you. If you give your players actual space to roleplay at the table, you'll never get more than 2 encounters in 2 hours. Right? Sometimes no more than 2 encounters in 3. So ask yourself, what are the encounters? So when I go into prep for a game, I usually say, what are the major encounters that they have to go through? If I have 3, maybe 4 hours, I might be able to push a third one. And that encounter usually is the meeting, right? It's the initial encounter of the meeting. I can give more space to. Then what is the second encounter and what is the final encounter? When I'm prepping for a long-term game and I'm going into a night and we're in the middle of 20 of what will be 40 episodes, I don't really prep any different. I still say, what are the 2 encounters? The difference is these encounters are not going to be fast, right? It'll be a slow roll. It's more about the difference is what is the encounter versus what is the encounter giving them? Because when you have a bigger story to tell, you need to do a lot of giving as a GM. And we tend to, as GMs, we want to hoard. Because it's like, oh, I got this great secret. You're never going to figure it out. And it's like, well, your story's not going anywhere if they don't figure it out. Right? And I don't mean give it to them. I don't mean break the rules or fudge your dice. I mean, you have to dangle it, but if you're not actually dangling it close enough that if they jump, they can catch it, then what's the point?
Yeah.
The game is lost. You still have to dangle it because part of the game for you is, will they bite? Because it's also a game for you, not just a game for them. Right? It's also a game for me. And that's another philosophy I have, which is I am playing at the table. As a GM, I don't like to think about myself like a director. A lot of people like to use the term facilitator, and I think that's good. A GM does facilitates the rules, facilitates fair play, facilitates worldview. But I still consider myself a storyteller, like at the core. I always joke with people. People ask a lot about my style because I use a lot of camera cuts, right? We see the camera pan over here, or time rewinds and goes back over here because 2 things are happening at once. So I use a lot of this terminology I get out of film because I've pitched movies. I've pitched plays. I've pitched product. I've pitched to wealthy people who I want to support, the play or the art project or the art gallery to get them to buy. And all of that is storytelling. Every ounce of marketing is storytelling. Every ounce of my business pitch to get you to fund me is storytelling. And so I've learned along the way the things that really matter. Now, that being said, one of the things that I have learned along the way that really, really matters is recognizing that you are a narrator voice. That's kind of how I see myself. So if you're reading a script, I'm the italics. I'm the bits in between. I'm just filling the gaps. I'm not actually writing the story. And so it's like watching one of the things I love about the Princess Bride movie is how every time it cuts back to the grandfather and the boy, it's like you realize in this really beautiful and kind of simple way that his grandfather is narrating. So when it cuts back and you're watching them again, you can almost hear his voice at certain points narrate this piece between the dialogue, between the character choices. I don't make character choices. I just narrate these pieces in between. I'm just stitching the parts together. Now that can look a lot of different ways. That may mean moving time forward. That may mean a new NPC, which sometimes I do take on a GM NPC. That's something I like to do in long-term campaigns. I'll take on a more permanent NPC role that sticks around or has a lot of supportive interaction with the crew. It makes me again feel a little bit like a player, but doesn't make me feel like I'm breaking the table in some way. So there are a lot of, I guess, different things that I do. Even the way you facilitate a group of people, everybody's different. And when I run a game with all new people that I've never met before, like a Sunday Fun Day event where it could be anybody could sign up and come in. It's a very different and delicate process, right? Because you're trying to feel the table, you're trying to lean into certain people's strengths and as well as to other people's weaknesses, which oftentimes shine a lot brighter. And one of the things that I learned is not everybody plays the game the same. And I know that seems like a really simple statement, but they don't. And oftentimes I have found that when you have a quiet player or somebody that is not as forwardly role play heavy, one of the things you have to do is stop asking what do they do, but start asking how does your character feel? Part of diversity at the table is not just physically what we see with our eyes, or the way that somebody represents. Is also recognizing that people in life take in information differently. Extroverts tend to wear everything on their sleeves. I won't say all extroverts. I don't like that. But we talk through our problems. We want to talk through our problems. We see an issue. We stand up, right? We feel it's a very forward motion. But a lot of people's first instinct is not that, right? Introverts deal with different things. Some people struggle with dyslexia and how their words come out. And so being able to give a player an option to tell their story, not in dialogue, right? Not in dialogue, but in feeling, can still inform everybody else and make for better role play. Because
Can I say something? I want to say that in the 40-something episodes I've done of this, that has got to be one of the better and more interesting comments and probably fresher comments that I've heard. It's really interesting. Like, I think we all kind of know this, right? We all know that, like, well, if you want to role play, we're not going to put someone in a corner and say the bard doesn't have to sing. Like, obviously, when you're rolling dice for combat, you're not getting up to actually fight. So we know that people don't have to do it. But I think what I often sort of overlook as a game master, which you have just pointed out, and I think this is actually super smart, it reminds me of, sometimes there are several, if you're reading like Ulysses by James Joyce, it's all inner monologue, right? So role play doesn't necessarily have to be something that's visual that's happening there. It can be the inner feelings of someone. And I really think your comment about asking people how they feel and just expanding on that, even if it's something that's not picked up on, say, necessarily by other players, is part of the contribution at the table. Yep. And I love that idea, and I'm going to totally steal it.
Steal it. That's why it's out there. I mean, it's important too, just for new players. Like some new players don't know that I could call to make an insight on another player, right? So if you've got a really quiet player and the character's RP, therefore, is also finding itself to be quiet at the table, asking how you feel allows the player and the character to reveal something without dialogue, RP dialogue, in a way that informs everybody else. So then somebody can go, oh, you're feeling sad. Well, I don't want to metagame, but could I roll an insight to figure that out? So it puts it on somebody else that is that forward extrovert at the table that goes, oh, I know exactly what this role is. Somebody just needs to insight. Right? It's that's
great. I like it.
In the improv world, what we call catching the ball and throwing it back. A scene works when I catch it and I toss it. I catch it and I toss it. The worst kind of comedy is when I hoard the ball. So if that person's hoarding the ball, it's not my job to come up and take it from them and then hand it to somebody. I've got to figure out a way to get them to toss it.
Mm.
And I just need to give that person the next, because they're an extrovert, I got to let them do it, right? Give them the chance to toss it. And so it's actually the introvert who has something really powerful to say or something really poignant that's deeper than just dialogue to reveal. And then that goes, oh, wait, here, take the ball. Can I roll an insight?
Yeah.
Right? That is what my job as a facilitator is, and my job as a narrator is. Because sometimes the narrator doesn't say this is what they say. This is how they feel.
Mm. It's actually interesting that you say this, and I think this brings up another question I have here. I genuinely believe, like as an English teacher, I really think that there's something going on with role-playing games where they can be every bit as like poignant, as meaningful, and as deep and exploratory as any book or movie or comic or whatever. But having said that, when perhaps you're playing a game, sometimes you do get into like sticky situations where there's situations where people have certain feelings, and they may be feelings for the character. There may be something inside of them that they're thinking about, like an experience they've had that doesn't quite reconcile very well with what's going on at the table. How do you recommend, or how would you yourself handle situations where you're getting into kind of sticky territory? Do you do session zeros?
Well,
do you have
yeah,
cards
yeah.
at the table?
I always do a
methods?
session zero in some way, shape, or form. Sometimes it doesn't necessarily apply for a one shot, but usually when I'm casting my one shots, and casting is a whole other conversation. I could have a whole day teaching you what great casting is and what it actually looks like when you're talking about chemistry at a table. But that's neither here or there. Like I could end up with 5 random people on a Sunday fun day. That's not on me. So how do I mitigate that chemistry that wasn't plucked by me, basically? So a session zero is always really, really important. Because it gives everybody a feel for each other outside of character. A session zero should never be done in character. It's a firm belief I hold. We don't show up in costume. A session zero is just us as people getting to know each other to play a game. And that getting to know each other can look like talking about our characters, finishing character sheets, lines and veils, safety tools, right? All the conversations and things that we use to set our communication at the table. And that's really important, because oftentimes when tables find themselves in sticky situations, it's because they don't have communication tools. They're using role play to communicate. What they're really trying to say is, I'm beginning to feel heated in this moment. Or I'm beginning to feel like this is more personal to me as a player, not my character. Or I'm having a hard time delineating when you're making fun of me or making fun of my character. Right? Your character, right? There are these confusions that happen. Tabletop is different in theater and acting because I know when it's my character. That line on that page tells me this is when it's my character and this is when it's Dot off stage, even though some actors still have the meta problem, right? Where we can't take it away. And that's actually what this is. It's called bleed. It happens. It is a studied thing in actors and acting professionals because it happens. Most often in people that are doing extreme meta work or acting work, right? Where they're getting so into character that they don't break, or I don't know, they send horrible things through the mail to their coworkers, those kinds of things. But it happens where we can't delineate between ourselves and the character. And our character's emotions and our emotions become intertwined. And that's when things get dangerous. That's usually when arguments break out, when PvP takes place, when a party can't decide between 2 options, or the rest of the party is stuck having to vote between 2 players that are butting heads. So my question usually is it actually the characters that are butting heads, or is it the players? Right. And when we start to get into that situation, it's actually time to stop playing. It is time to stop. For a variety of reasons. 1, we may need to have a bigger conversation. 2, nobody's having fun anymore.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to watch 2 players argue. Now, that's also coming from somebody who plays dark fantasy games. I run an entire podcast network dedicated to World of Darkness. Okay. So I'm not saying that we can't have deep passion. We can't have dark stories. We can't have empathy and emotion and tears at the table. We can't backstab. We can. We backstab each other. We do horrible things because that's what that game is about. Is that what your game's supposed to be about? Because that if your game's actually about like saving the king and getting the crown from thieves that took it, why is this becoming a political drama? So that conversation of what this game is set up to be, is it a political drama? Is it a high fantasy? Is it a dark, twisted world where the supernatural is trying to exist and maintain its humanity? Okay, those things have to be talked about at session 0. And when we start to break away from those things, or a player or two are removing it from that realm and making it something it's not, that is actually the point as a facilitator where you say, is this actually the route we want to go? And you can pose it as a question. I don't encourage you to just shut them down. I encourage you to say, hey, I'd like to stop playing. I think we need a breath of fresh air, and I'd like to talk about what's really going on here. Are you actually mad about this? Can we put some things on the table? And then if you break and everybody's like, no, we're doing great. We got O's across the table, baby. I'm loving this argument. But it's making everybody else uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Can still be an X, right? Or in this case, it could be an N. We could be getting close to something. And so I, as the GM, may say, okay, no more arguing. We're going to just, fade to black this scene that the night ends at the campsite with the two of you arguing. I need you each to make a charisma check. There is a simple way to make decisions in tabletop games. Make a roll. Because the fact of the matter is most of your players, because they're bought into the game. Because then it's not personal. It's not about me choosing. It's not about other characters choosing. It's like, let's make a die roll.
It's the
Both
mechanic.
you make a charisma check, right? Go back to the mechanics. Whose charisma check comes out higher? Great. At the end of the night, you have an argument. It doesn't go great, but the better said argument is this person. Whether you all choose who you choose to follow is up to you. But like the better, perfectly stated blah blah comes from this person because the charisma check was made. Call, end of scene, move on. You have that control as a GM. And so there are some times where you have to flex that control as the facilitator. And I hate to say control, you have to flex your tools, the tools that are available to you. And one of the great tools that's available to a GM is always mechanics. You don't know what to do, make them roll for it. Even if you don't have anything to add to it, roll a D20. It'll just be a luck, what I call a luck check. Just lucky roll. Are you lucky or are you unlucky?
Yeah, I like it because you're taking the personalness out of it, and you're just making it a mechanical role that's in the game, and that's kind of it. I think that's really good. Well, Dot, you've been very generous with your time. I'm making you late for your next stream.
You're not. You're definitely not making me late. I haven't even got a link yet. It means Arv's late.
So, well, then let me try and squeeze in another question or two.
Let's keep talking. We'll talk until I see a link.
Okay. Yeah. Let me know. So let me ask you this then. I think anyone listening at home or watching at home can tell, and I trust me, go watch your stuff. It's very professional. It's very well done. You, unlike a lot of people who do very great, like fine podcasts, video essays, actual plays, blah 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 blah. You have made the successful transition, congratulations, as of a few months ago, to going to work as a content production manager for Kobold Press,
the content
correct?
production manager for Kobold Press.
My goodness. Let me take out my little notebook. What is your secret and how did you do it? What happened?
That's a great question. There are parts of it that are serendipitous and there are parts that are not. When the top of 2020 rolled around, I was in a full-time job. I was a marketing director for a comedy house here in Atlanta. It was a great job. Adored them. And then, and then COVID happened. And the theater shut its doors like all theaters do. And it just so happened I had been streaming to Twitch and producing my own stuff. And, I've worked for Gen Con, right? So Gen Con TV, I've worked for them on site. So I'm part of their on-site stream team every year. I've worked with Roll20 and Roll20 Con to be a producer for them, like a freelance producer for them when they didn't have internal capacity for stuff. I produced like all over the place, plus my own stuff, right? I helped Mike produce on Unmade Gaming, just works. So I've been doing this freelance hustle for a while, and it was something I was still doing all the way up to the top of 2020. Like I was still working a full-time job and producing on the side. And the theater closed its doors, and I thought, well, this is improv. Let's start a Twitch channel. And so I started a Twitch channel for Dad's Garage, which is the company here out of Atlanta. And we raised $20,000 in the first month of our Twitch channel to support the theater's doors closing, so we could keep paying our improv artist for a period of time. And that was kind of a huge deal. Like, we were producing like 30 hours of content every week with all of our comedians and improvisers. Now, let's be real, not all improv, like actual comedy improv, transitions well to the digital screen, which are things that we learn over time. But it was a great success in a variety of ways for me. So between all the things I had under my belt, I had done some podcasting, all of this. Kobold Press was looking for a part-time Twitch manager. And I happened to know a few people over there, and my name was kind of suggested. And so I told him, I was like, I can't quit my full-time job, so it's definitely got to be part-time. And so I started kind of working hourly for them. I talked to them about what they were looking for, the growth that they wanted, kind of came in and said, okay, here's what I can do in the time, here's what you can do. And so because I was stuck at home in the middle of the 2020 like lockdown, I was able to produce for Kobold Press and Dad's Garage at the same time. And I was like hot and fast in both places. And then I got a full-time offer from another gaming company. I won't say which one, but they recruited me. And the offer was not great, but the offer was enough for me to be able to go to Kobold Press and say, hey. And they were like, hey,
leverage.
Please don't go. We want to keep you full time. And so we negotiated what full time looks like for a content creator, because it doesn't just look like Dot gets to stream to Twitch 3 days a week and that's my job. A content creation looks much bigger. In fact, it's grown to include all of our panels and things at conventions, which we go to a lot of conventions every year. It's expanded to include all of our partnerships with conventions as well. Like, we partner with Dragon Con, right, to do live shows with some of their A-list celebrities and things like that. So it's kind of encompassed that as well. And then it includes the back end of the stream, right, which is all of the design, all of that stuff, and then the post work as well. And so it was kind of, the job actually grew very quickly into a very robust thing. We were producing a lot of stuff, and you live, you learn, and some things change, and we're making change. That I would say is one thing that people are really hesitant of. You should look how many times I've changed. Look at the kind of content I've changed too. How I changed doing it, how I changed producing it, how I found the money. Sometimes you have to change. Like, even in 2020, when I was still self-producing to my channel, before this is the world, right? Before Kobold Press hired me part-time, I had applied to a very large grant here in the city of Atlanta. Most people don't know that cities and your counties get money from the state and the government, in which they have to pass out to artists most of the time. And in 2020, all of this money that was supposed to be for like public artworks and these kinds of things went away because nobody could be out in public. So they had this lump sum of money, and the city of Atlanta, I troll their site quite frequently to see what kind of grants and scholarships and stuff come up. They had an option for digital artists. They included digital artists for the first time ever. And so I applied for the full grant through Fulton County, and I got $10,000 in 2020 to produce 3 tabletop shows on my channel. And I did. I bought cameras for people that didn't have them. I partnered with Atlanta-based artists that had never played tabletop before. I did this whole big project for myself. So between all of these many things and the constant change, what inevitably happens is people notice. Right. And when you consistently produce good work, which you'll note, I didn't rush. I didn't launch my channel in a year. It took years. I produced a few shows that I produced over a series of years because I took my time. I raised some money. I did it the way I wanted. I did it right. So, again, quality over quantity. And eventually people were like, hey, we need quality. And I said, I can bring you quality. And even in the negotiation with Kobold Press, I was like, this is what this job looks like to me. And I'm not, if you can't meet me here, if we can't pay people this when I make a contract, if we can't do this, if we can't do that, I am not the producer for you. And so, again, negotiation, those negotiation skills kind of came into play, and I stuck around. And then I went from being their Twitch producer to being the content production manager full time right around Dragon Con of this year. So I basically got a step up, and the job kind of expanded in a larger way.
And now this is remote, right? Is there like a head office somewhere? Because I know they have an address.
Head office is Washington. Yeah, that's where Wolfgang is stationed out of, and where some of our storage is. Right, like we keep a lot of our books and stuff stored that go out to places and stuff in Washington, because that's where a lot of people are in the near and around Seattle. Like we have a lot of people in the Northeast. So it is our headquarters to some degree, but we do not have an office. Everything that Kobold Press does is remote.
Okay. Do you have like a typical day? Like what would surprise me about what maybe this is two questions. What would surprise me about what a content production manager does? What would I not expect, or what do you think would alarm people?
Interesting. Alarm people.
Nah, I'm just kidding. But something you wouldn't expect.
Okay.
Like
something you wouldn't expect.
I've stumped our guest.
That's a really great question, because I could tell you some things that I do, but like you're gonna be like, oh, well, that makes sense. Right?
Yeah.
You're gonna be like, that makes sense that you have to do this thing.
Is there something weird?
Yeah, I'm like, what is a weird thing I have to do that you would never expect that I have to do? That's so bizarre.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me play some thinking
I know you've
music.
actually stumped me. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, that wasn't on the list of questions.
So I don't know if it would be surprising, but it is something that I do. It is something that I do. One of the things that I do is I keep a database. This comes from my years. I used to work in a casting office. And that was one of those jobs I did in undergrad. And I learned how to catalog people. Which
Excellent.
sounds horrible, but that is the entertainment industry, y'all. And so one of the things that I've done is anybody that I work with, any place that I go, anything that I volunteer for, you end up in my what is basically a digital Rolodex. And are you talent? How did it go? I mark if we're going to work with you again. Did we have problems? Right. And it's mine. Nobody sees it but Dot.
Right.
But it is a tool that I use when somebody comes to me and goes, hey, I'm looking for I got you.
But you know what's interesting about this is I think that a lot of people, and to be honest, again, I think you are showing your professional feathers versus like just the sort of like the people that are in this for the hobby. And this, I think, separates the pros from the passionate hobbyists. But I believe it 100%. And I think that idea, I mean, I actually used to have to keep, so when I worked at my entertainment business job years ago, I had to keep a catalog of people that the person I worked for, I had to keep a catalog of everyone that came in. Talent, agents, and everything in between, even the oddest things. And I think, it sort of made me realize something at a certain point. And now that you're saying it, I mean, really, I think that a lot of people, when they think, oh, content production manager available, I've got a channel, I do content, I can do that. And just like you said, it is not, there are so many other things. I would have been
ready for this job 6 years ago, right? Like when I started this, and I think that's important too, that there's nothing where I was the passionate hobbyist who became a professional. Now, I always had professional blood in my genes, and I have a business degree and blah, blah, blah. So I'm not talking about your demeanor. I'm talking about like the level at which you're producing or the level at which you're involved. And I think it's also important to figure out where you stand in all of this. There are a lot of what we consider content creators in the tabletop industry that aren't really creating content. They are talent. Okay. You pay them, they show up, they do a thing, but they themselves are not producing content. They're not creating content.
Right.
And that's okay. We need those people. I need those people. Right. But they know who they are. They know that is what they do. And then you've got people like B. Dave Walters who are all of it. Right. Creator and talent and a thing. And
he's like a tornado. He's a tornado.
He's a tornado
in a like chat message.
But all of that to be said,
great,
I guess, is that you should decide where you are. And it's okay to be a hobbyist, right? My decision to start paying people meant I wanted to take a step towards making it professional.
That's professional.
There is nothing wrong not paying everybody as long as you all know that it's just a hobby stream.
Right. I agree with that too. I think as long as everybody's kind of on the same page, you're all having fun and you're enjoying it, there's you can kind of do what you like.
Yeah, do what you like. I mean, you have to do you. My personal value set, it may be different from yours, and that is not me judging you. That's just like, this is what I live my life by. And knowing that it kind of, it shapes a lot of it. So now I did just get a link, but
I was going to
thought
say
about something that I thought I'd leave you with, which I thought was really, really interesting. And I encourage, this is
Please.
maybe an encouragement for everybody out there that wants to
Please.
do this, that is interested. Years ago at art school, Matthew Lillard came and talked to my class. Fact of the matter was, I didn't know this until much later. He had dated one of my teachers long ago when they did Ren fairs together in Connecticut.
Interesting.
And so she had asked Matthew Lillard to come back. She's married now. They're doing their thing, friendly, to come talk to our class. We're budding artists, budding actors. And here's Matthew Lillard, right? And there were a lot of the usual questions that get asked and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And I remember him telling us something on his way out. It was like one of the last things he said. He said, if you are waiting around for people to ask you to do it, to participate, you're never going to get asked. That part of being a great actor, a great artist, a great creator is making your opportunities. Kobold Press did not have a job for me. They didn't have a job for me. They had a part-time position where they basically needed somebody to manage their Twitch streams, which I did for quite a while. And then when it became, I was like, oh, well, there's a lot more that could be done here. We could expand this way. The job could look like this, right? I made it for myself. There weren't indie tabletops Twitch streams when the dot lot started doing them. I made them. There isn't money in tabletop to produce streams, so I went and found it in a grant. You cannot wait. You cannot ask permission. You cannot wait to be asked. You got to stop being the paint. You got to start being the painter, y'all. So like, take it from the words of Matthew Lillard himself, who encouraged Dot all those years ago, long before I knew our paths would cross once again in the tabletop scene. You have to go make your opportunities, right? Don't stop creating no matter what people tell you. Just got to do it. And it may take you a long time, and that's okay too. Process is way better than product.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to let that be the last word because I find that to be extremely inspiring. Chelsea, thank you so much for coming on the program. I really enjoyed it. You were a wellspring, a wealth of information, and I appreciate you sort of like...
Yeah. I was about to say, I'll tell you, I guess, where you can find me.
Yes.
You can go online. You can find me where all Little Red Dots are found. Obviously, over at Kobold Press, I make a lot of content for them. I do every Wednesday show. If you just want to come hang out with us, we talk all things Kobold Chats. Or on Kobold Chats, we talk all things Kobold Press. But I have a new thing I can talk about that I promised I would. So I'm going to do it here at the end. I've got streams. You can find all my streams, but Dot is expanding. I took on at the beginning of 2020 my largest writing contract ever. For tabletop, and I am proud to announce that I am the world designer for the brand new Fallout RPG book coming to Modifius in 2023. If you love Fallout, if you love the things that I do and the kind of worlds that I create and play in, it's been a long time since I've been really super duper proud of something, and Dot's really proud of this one. So it's an IP I've only dreamed of working on. It's a company I've only ever dreamed of working with. So for the first time, I'm getting to put out a really big writing project that is a bit of a love child of Fallout for me out to the tabletop world. So keep your eyes peeled. 2023, the book is coming.
You said it was big. I didn't know it was that big. That's big.
It's big.
That's really big.
Modifius has decided to put out a proper tabletop for Fallout, and I'm the world designer for it. So check it out. I'm very excited.
Congratulations. I am so excited that you would just say that on my program. So thank you for saying it on my program. But Chelsea, you've been very generous with your time. Please tell Arv I'm so sorry that I made his stream late.
I will let him know.
But thank you very much. And to all of you out there, thank you so much for watching. Please do think about hitting the like and subscribe button. You'll find all of Chelsea's links down below in the description, okay? But everybody out there, have yourselves a great game and stay safe.